Good morning, everyone. It is Tuesday, April 27th, 2021. And what we're going to do is listen to a podcast this morning. It's Ryan Holiday, author of Ego is the Enemy, The Obstacle is the Way, Stillness is the Key, The Daily Stoic, interviewing a sports performance psychologist. His name is Dr. Michael Gervais. And let's go right to this podcast.
Some advice, and he gave me a bunch of great advice, and he really encouraged me. And it was a super important, informative conversation that I continue to reap benefits from to this day. And I ended up coming out and meeting some folks at the Seahawks. I went out and did his podcast several years ago. It was an illustrative moment, and so I'm really excited to talk to Michael Gervais today. I actually been listening to his podcast for a long time. Shaka Smart told me about it. Everyone knows Michael Gervais, the influencer of the influencers as far as people doing great things in sports and business and music and life. I texted Camila Cabello before I got on with him and said I was going to talk to him, and she was very excited. I talked to Rich Roll, another guy who loves him. Michael is legit. You're going to learn a lot in this interview. And then actually tomorrow, the day after I'm recording this, I'm going back on his podcast again. So if you want a longer conversation or you want more him asking me questions, you can listen to that. And I did an interview with him several years ago, as I was saying, that's like 3 hours long, which I think you might like. You can listen to the Finding Mastery podcast, which is a great look into Michael's mind. And you can check out his Audible original, which he wrote with Seattle Seahawks coach Pete Carroll, Compete to Create an Approach to Living and Leading Authentically. A great dude, a great book. Check this out and enjoy. So I was curious about your story, because how does one become a performance psychologist? Because frankly, I wasn't even aware that was a thing that existed until not that long ago. And I'm not sure, I think that it's becoming more popular, and obviously you have a big platform, but I've got to imagine your average person, when they think, Tom Brady or Russell Wilson, they're not, or baseball, they don't think like, this is where the real competition is these days. Like, this is where the real training is being done.
Yeah. So is the question like about training, or is the question about like
how did you get into it? I'm curious, like how you even gravitated towards that as a profession.
So it's like my awareness started when I was 15 years old, and there's two types of surfing, like rope surfing. One was free surfing, one was competitive surfing, and I just couldn't put it together when the competition was on. And so in free surfing, I had great command. Like I loved the way it felt to be out there and do my thing and be creative. And then as soon as people were judging and watching and scoring, and I just became, 50% of myself, something like that. And so I was in a heat, perfect conditions, super glassy. It's about head high, which is just kind of really fun, great conditions. And there's only 3 people out in the water. And normally there's like 30, let's say. And it's highly competitive, even in free surfing, to get the wave. But it's more like an aggressiveness meets positioning. And so come competition day, there was a gentleman that I was surfing with all the time. He was like 20 something, I was 15, and he paddles by me and he goes, "Gervais, I see you out here every week. And you got to stop during these competitions. You just got to stop thinking about what could go wrong." And I was like, how the hell? How did he know? And then come to find out there's this thing called psychology. And so eventually just took me down that path. And so that's how it started. But psychology, undergrad was general psych, master's degree was in sports and sport and exercise science. So kinesiology based, and then PhD in psychology with an emphasis in sport and performance.
Yeah, actually, now that you say this, it strikes me that performance psychologists have always existed. They were just previously known as older players. Like that's where the wisdom was, or managers or coaches, right? It's only as sports has professionalized that became a specialty, its own domain that there were experts in. But the idea of like, oh, I see exactly what you're doing and I've done that myself, or that this is a very common thing that we see rookies doing every single year. I mean, that's as old as probably the Greek Olympics.
When you think about who influences the psychology of people, it tends to be people that are influential in our lives. That doesn't mean that they're skilled. It doesn't mean that they're trained. It doesn't mean that they have any command of research or science or evidence or best practices, but they might have an intuition. They might have a way about themselves. They might be on it. They might be absolutely freaking amazing. And so sport and performance psychology is the formal study of the psychology of excellence. How do the extraordinaries, from a research evidence-based standpoint, how do they do it? And the reason we want research and evidence behind it is so that we can stack on it, and we're building from sturdy foundations, internal foundations, rather than, my uncle, he played in the league once, and what he did was, well, that's good for your uncle. Maybe it really worked, and he was a Hall of Famer, but it doesn't mean it's healthy, and it certainly doesn't mean it's sustainable. So yeah, that's kind of, that would be the only slight difference. But your point is well taken, which is, let's call it 60 years ago, which isn't that long ago. Great coaches, whether they're in sport, well, let's just stay with sport. Yeah. Great coaches did most of it. They were the chefs, they were the nutritionists, they were the sub-parents, they were the technical coaches, physical coaches, mental coaches. And then as disciplines started to get more sophisticated, the progressive coaches like, hey, there's this thing called strength and conditioning as a science.
Right.
Maybe we should bring them in so our athletes will be bigger, faster, stronger in the fourth quarter, end of the game. Sure enough, they were. You apply some good science and stuff happens. But that was like 60 years ago. Now every team has strength and conditioning. But probably the last 10 years ago is when the progressive coaches really started to double down on bringing the science of psychology into the fold.
Yeah, it's interesting to me, too. I think sports is probably ahead of the rest of the world on this. And for people who've watched Billions, maybe you see a little bit in like Wall Street. But like when I've been lucky enough, I know you've done the same thing, when I went to see you at the Seahawks, or when I've been to great college programs, and then, you visit a military base, you're meeting with some people in the special forces, you realize that actually pretty much anywhere that elite performance is happening, they've had to figure out the need to have someone specialize in making their elite performers better at the sort of mental side of the game. And it's weird to me how similar all those domains are, even if in one domain they're hitting a ball with a bat, and in another one they're flying Apache helicopters, and then another they're trading stocks. The same idea of like getting better at the performance side of things being a priority is really interesting to me.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're on that for sure, which is that there are only three things that we can train as.
So what do you get out of that right there? How does this relate to you?
That excellence is something you have to constantly work to achieve.
Okay, a little more basic. How does this apply? How is this relevant to all of you?
You need a coach.
Be a little more specific.
It's nearly impossible to do it by yourself. You've got to have somebody who not only cares, but has the knowledge behind the mind, behind the actions, behind the position. You have to have somebody in your corner. And like, if you try and do it by yourself, you're going to be like that kid out on the surfboard, just blowing it.
Training and conditioning.
Focus.
Well, here's what I would say. Do you consider yourself an elite performer, or do you want to be an elite performer? Do you look at yourself in that way? Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes.
If you really do, what probably makes you an elite performer?
Well, elite performers prepare, and they prepare through training, and they spend most of their time training and less time actually performing.
Why does this guy have a job?
Because everyone's looking for an edge. Everyone's looking to get better.
Not everyone. Who's looking for an edge?
Top.
Elite performers.
Elite performers are looking for an edge. So again, does that apply to you would be my question.
Yes.
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 100%.
Yes.
Takes a village.
All right.
Steve?
Hold on.
Humans, and they cut across industries, right? You can train your craft, whatever that might be, to your point, helicopters or throwing footballs or, canvassing, with paint. So you train your craft, train your body, and you can train your mind. And the best of the best are saying, and they've been doing this for a long time, hundreds, thousands of years, saying, I'm not leaving this mental training thing up to chance. It's just that the science is now catching up, let's call it the last, 60 years. And so, you take your mind everywhere you go. How about that? So, if it's a mess, it doesn't matter if you're in the living room or a boardroom. If it's a mess, sooner or later it gets exposed. And that's what happened to me. I didn't have a sturdy framework to understand what it meant to be judged as opposed to what it meant to use an opportunity to see what I was made of,
I was going to say that situation you described is so timeless and so universal, which is like, I know how to do this very well, and I've practiced it a million times, but where I struggle is under pressure, or where I struggle is in the moment, or where I struggle is, when I had a bad night the night before. Like, how do you do it when it counts? You can see why that matters, whether you're trading stocks, negotiating trade deals for a government, or SEAL Team 6.
Yeah, and like your relationship with thinking is born out of philosophy. So you've got your arms around philosophical positions.
All right. How does all of that relate to you?
I like the distinction of breaking down. You train your body, you train your mind, you train your craft. And so there's these different venues where you each part you're working to improve, then they all support each other.
What is the thing that he just said that's true for all of you?
You take your mind everywhere you go, and if it's a mess, it gets exposed.
Right. You take your mind, and in this interview, you'll see he makes a distinction between your brain and your mind. And the analogy he uses, he says it's not perfect. However, it's a working analogy. Your brain is like your hardware, and your mind is the software that you put into that hardware. Your brain is hardwired for what? Survival. That's the way the equipment is set up. So if you want to go beyond survival, then you have to program your mind in a certain way. So all of you need to realize you take your mind everywhere you go. And if all you're doing is thinking the same repetitive thoughts each and every day, which are mostly negative, that's not going to help you. He also said something very, very important. Do you have a sturdy framework? Do you have a sturdy framework that you're operating from? An example, abundance versus scarcity. That's your part of your framework. External versus internal. Are you focused on the external, or are you focused on the internal? That's part of your framework. Do you believe in yourself or not? That's part of your framework. So the question that all of you really want to take a look at, do I have a sturdy mental framework? Because you're going to hear a little later on in this interview, the place that you want to be in life. If everyone could go on mute, the place that you want to be in life on a daily basis is where your thoughts, your words, your actions are in alignment with the way you want to show up, no matter what the circumstance or condition. And as he just alluded to, what happens when you're under pressure? What happens when you're in the living room? What happens when they ask about commission? What happens when they ask about price? What happens when you're under the gun, when it's not a low stakes situation, it's a high stakes situation? Are your thoughts, are your words, are your actions the same when you're in a high stakes situation versus when there's no pressure? That's the thing that all of you need to be looking at.
And ideas and tenets, and psychology and philosophy are intertwined.
Sure.
And so some would suggest that certain branches of psychology are not that different than philosophy. And some of the greats, you know, like the first American psychologist, applied psychologist, William James. I mean, was he a philosopher? I think so.
I think so, yes.
Yeah. So are most people philosophers? Yeah, some are just really sophisticated
Right.
and have really, you know, pulled on some threads to get some clarity. But most of us have ideas about ideas and ideas about humans, you know, because we're social beings. And then where the kind of the overlapping begins to be between philosophy and psychology begins to, you know, get onto the edges is what are best practices from a laboratory meets frontier. You know, like there's a frontier in all the domains that you're talking about. Like, where does the laboratory and the frontier, where do those meet, and how do we prepare and condition our minds to be able to execute out there? And sometimes philosophical frameworks are one of the big rocks to get in the container.
Yeah, I would think so.
Like with the Stoics, like, you know, to your point, like, sorry to interrupt you, but what's in your control, what's not? Super basic but powerful framework. And then when we kind of pull on that thread a little bit more, like, okay, what's in your control is how you speak. Well, let's train how you speak to yourself. Let's train the way that you interpret events. You know, you can train those.
Yeah, and what I think about it too, like when I think about, okay, so my background's in philosophy, I've read all this stuff. Well, then why do I have a therapist? Why have I, you know, gone to marriage counseling with my wife? Why have I done these things? It's because the broad philosophical concepts can only get you so far, and then you have to work with a specific person who has real training in the sort of the human psychology and, you know, the interacting with human beings. I think philosophical principles tend to be broad. I don't want to say they're abstract, but they tend to be ideas. And then to me, where a performance psychologist or a psychologist or a therapist of some kind is, that's helping the one-on-one individual apply those ideas to their specific problems, rooted in their understanding of each other as human beings.
Yeah, that's certainly where you go when you go upstream. You go, okay, what are the philosophical principles? Then downstream are what are the psychological skills and tools that you can build as a repertoire so that you can apply the right skill or the right tool in the right way at the right time.
Yes.
And that doesn't necessarily mean that psychologists are working at the individual level only.
Sure.
Because there is scale to do in psychology, but it really is about principles, skills, and tools that you can practice. And psychology is not that different than most other domains in human performance, which is like in the physical training world, there's sets and reps that you do, whether it's squats or whatever it is.
All right. What did you just take from that?
Principles, skills, and tools.
Okay, what does that mean?
You need to build it every day like you would if you were going to the gym to build your body.
Mindset, time blocking, CRM, process management, emotional intelligence, tactical empathy. What are those things?
Tools.
Principles,
Tools.
skills, tools. It's exactly what he's talking about. It's exactly what he's talking about. Versus doing what?
Daily fire drill.
Right.
Being,
Versus
being
just,
inconsistent.
right. No,
Chasing.
just running around every day, throwing stuff up against the wall.
It's reacting versus, responding.
Okay.
Hey, Steve.
Yeah.
I also got like him talking a broad conceptual level of understanding and then bringing it down to a very micro, how do you apply it? Like the tactical application of it. Like for instance, like emotional intelligence, like you read, never split the difference and all this, but like I do the role play with Danielle. And to me, that's like a very tactical way of learning how to implement a philosophy.
Right. That's why I've got the 5:30 a.m. group, the 7 a.m. group, the 7:30 a.m. group to role play. And every day it's like pulling teeth. Every day it's like pulling teeth. Nobody's got any scenario they want to role play versus coming to that call prepared. All right. This is a situation. Let me practice in front of the group what I've already worked out in private so I can get some feedback. If you're practicing, if you're not practicing every day, then you're not going to get better. You're not going to get better. Let me be very clear about that. You're not going to get better. And B, if you're practicing the wrong stuff, you're not going to get better. You're not going to get better. You've got to be practicing the right stuff in the right way and getting specific feedback. And if you're not doing that, then don't expect to be what?
An elite performer.
An elite performer. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. If you want to be an elite performer, then you've got to do certain things in a certain way.
Do 6 reps of 4 sets and, call that, part of your workout. The same is true psychologically. There's sets and reps.
Good morning, it's Ellen Schwartz.
Reading training, sets and reps and confidence training, sets and reps and focus and refocus training. I can get into all that if you want to get into it. But then there's also this other part, which is the self-discovery part, which is like, who are you?
Right.
And this is where it gets really interesting. Like that's the intersection that you and I play in. Like, what are the big questions in life? And are you grokking with them? What is your purpose? What are you going to do with your money? What does success mean? What is high performance? How do you define high performance? And so, like, until you get your arms around those things, it stays in the abstract for others. And last part that I want to make on this point, because it's so important, is that, let's say you said philosophy will get you kind of going. Well, if you only have psychological skills and tools, but don't map it to a philosophy or framework, I call it psychological framework. You don't map it into a sturdy framework, which is really, how do you make sense of yourself and the world around you? If you don't map it there, it just becomes like these kind of poorly adhesive Band-Aids,
Sure.
They're Band-Aids that they kind of work, but they're not really sticking because it's, I don't know, it's a little bit of a weird analogy, but you need both,
I like
is
it.
the point.
I think you need both, and then I think where the performance specialist comes in, or the coach, however you want to think about it, is so important. Is like, okay, so I was thinking about this as you were talking. So Alexander the Great is tutored by Aristotle. And then Alexander the Great goes to conquer the world. Now, he could have taken one of Aristotle's books with him and just read that. But instead, he brings Aristotle with him for a reason, right? Because it's about a dialogue, a discussion. He wants to be able to bring specific problems to this great mind for him to walk him through. And I think about Marcus Aurelius has this advisor named Rusticus. He has a philosophy teacher named Sextus. It's the advisors that he has, the people who understand not just the world, but would then understand him at a level that he probably doesn't even understand himself, that allows him to work through these really difficult problems. And I think that's what you need when the stakes are high, like you're throwing, you're in the Super Bowl, or you're running.
All right, what did you just hear there?
Even the greatest minds and the greatest people in history wanted and needed outside input to help refine what they were doing.
Trying things out in low stakes situations.
Or you bring these great advisors for this discussion. And so I thought that, because it's continuous right there.
Difference.
I heard something a little different.
Go ahead.
The difference between having a book,
I was going to say,
having a advisor that knows you and how to help you take out of the book what you need.
Precisely.
David?
Yeah, I was going to say you have to individualize these principles and tools to your own set of beliefs, because it's ultimately you that's performing.
The question is, and this is something all of you have to look at, is do you have a framework for how you want to live your life? Do you have a framework for how you want to show up every single day? Do you have, your thoughts, your words, your action, are they lining up with anything? Or are you totally just reacting to what shows up on a daily basis? The program we just did with Dana Green, most every single question, if not every single question, was down in the weeds. No one was asking her about her framework. And it's her framework that has led to her success, her way of how she views the world and how she wants to live her life. It's her core values and her core principles and her ability to stay in alignment with those core values and those core principles, no matter what the circumstance or situation. The checklists are great. The checklists are wonderful. You all need them. What you need more, though, is having a sturdy framework.
A company, the CEO can't afford to have their emotional issues cloud their judgment, or and so I think it's really important that you bring someone in for your performance. It's not just for you, but it's not that you're deficient in some way. It's that the process brings out the best version of you.
Are emotional issues clouding your judgment? Anyone? Anyone?
Yes.
Sometimes. Slightly.
Of course.
I think it's a constant push and pull. If you're not aware of it, I mean, it's there. It's like air, and you become aware of it, and you have to learn to manage it.
Right. Your emotions are in play all the time, unless you're very conscious of your emotions. Otherwise, they are running the show. Your thoughts are a byproduct of your feelings. And if your emotions are all over the place based on whatever is happening, then so are your thoughts, and then so are your actions. And now Our thoughts, words, actions are not married to any type of framework.
There you go. And so that's exactly right. And you know what we've learned? So let's call it, so I've been in sports psychology, performance psychology for about 20, 25 years, somewhere in there. And the last 6 years, I've been fortunate enough to partner up and poke my head into enterprise businesses. At Microsoft being one of the most amazing partners that we have. And I was blown away. Ryan, poked my head in there, working with all the way down from the CEO, executive team, all the way through the organization. And in elite sport, we talk a lot about recovery. Mm-hmm. And we have a performance division that sits inside to help coaches figure out the psychology, their psychology, figure out the right psychology and the psychological skills for their athletes. And we talk about recovery a lot. And the reason I'm bringing up recovery is because in business, one, they don't have that customized partnered approach for training of the mind. They have mentors for training of craft, other CEOs that are on it or whatever, but training of the mind, they're not quite there yet. And they're certainly not on the conversation of recovery. Sure. And so what we've learned is that.
Okay, two things there. What are they?
Recovery is essential.
All right, that's one of them. What is recovery, everyone? Do you even know what it is? Do you know what he's referring to?
It's a day off.
I'm off.
Letting go.
It starts with taking time off, which none of you do. None of you.
I do.
Most every one of you fight taking any time off. Because if you feel like you're taking time off, Charlie, what's it feel like?
Like you're missing something, you're missing out. Maybe.
You're missing out, right? If I'm taking time off, I'm missing out. You've heard me say this, 1,000 times. Nobody can work 7 days a week. Nobody. If you're working 7 days a week, then that means you're operating on some level of burnout, whether it be low or high. And eventually you're going to run out of steam. And when you're operating on some level of burnout, what does that mean? What does that mean? How does that show up?
We're not in
Three things. Low performance.
Low performance. And low performance leads to what?
Failure.
Working harder. And working harder leads to what?
Poor health.
More burnout. Recovery, this idea, you look at a day off as missing out rather than looking at it as an essential part of what you need to do. Why would an athlete need recovery and you don't? Can anyone answer that question?
Would you be opposed to me adding something else to that?
Excuse me?
Would you be opposed to me adding something else to what you're saying?
Yes, I would.
Okay.
What do you want to say?
It just occurs that when you don't take time off, it's a vicious circle because you're being distracted by work and there's no time to get quiet and realize where your emotions are and to be conscious of your emotions because you're constantly busy.
Right. And that's exactly right. You can't, it puts you, the blender effect takes over and all of you know what it feels like. It's just, life is just one big blur and you're a pinball bouncing from thing to thing to thing. And you have no space, no time, no ability to actually step back and say to yourself, am I doing what is most important? Again, this goes back to having a sturdy framework. This is what I want you to get out of the Tuesday morning calls. Developing a framework that you're going to live your life by, no matter what the situation is, no matter what the circumstance. You stay true.
Recovery is a massive competitive advantage, both for internal thriving, meaning that I'm living.
What did he just say?
Recovery is a massive competitive advantage.
Recovery is a massive competitive advantage. In your mind, nothing could be further from the truth. Every day off you take is what? The way you do the math.
Missed opportunity lost.
Every day you take off is what in terms of how you do the math?
Is recovery.
No. Every day that you take off in your mind is what?
It's a loss.
A day lost in doing business.
A day lost, a day that I fall behind, correct?
Yes.
That's the way you look at a day off. I'm missing out. I'm falling behind. Nothing could be further from the truth. Just because it's uncomfortable doesn't mean it's the wrong thing to do.
My best life because I'm no longer irritated and frustrated and, malaise or fatigue or anxious or whatever, because I've got the right systems in place to recover well and to be my very best, to use your language. And then the other part of it is that when you cascade that throughout the organization, it becomes this massive competitive advantage. And it's radical because in elite sport, it is square one, and it's not there in business yet. So I'm excited to see what happens in business over the next decade.
Got a quick message from one of our sponsors here, and then we'll get right back to the.
A lot. They're not quite there yet. And there's certain
message from one of our sponsors, Collection Stoic at checkout. That's boxofawesome.com, code STOIC for 20.
Oh, and the language is really important because the language that we use is a reflection of our psychology, and it's also informing our psychology. So it's not just one directional. Is that if we don't quite understand the potency of the language that we're using, and I'll give you a handful of things like should or could or I gotta or never and always. Those are all considered cognitive distortions, and they end up creating frameworks about how we are thinking. So it's like a bottom-up way of approaching. Top down. And so to your point is that when we use the word human capital, workforce, labor force, it's almost like it takes the humanity out of it.
Sure.
Where when we talk about athletes and artists, we talk about talent. We call them, yeah, right, yeah. The thing that they're more aligned to the specialness of the thing that they do. But here's a trap. It's not quite as clean as equal divide. Here's the trap: is that most highly talented people were talented at a young age. They had some proclivity at a young age. I'm talking more about the sport world than business.
Sure.
But they were talented at a young age. And as a young age, what most people do is that they're supposed to form their identity. But if the identity is almost infused with the thing that you do, then your identity is mapped to your outcomes.
Sure.
And you have this, and it's this really confusing, non-conscious, below conscious surface that I am what I do. And that ends up becoming problematic because all we're doing is we're saying, oh, the athlete fill in the blank. And there's so much more than the athlete. So There's so much more than the star. There's so much more to them. There's a humanity in all things that we do. And I think a big part of my work in high performing environments is to help people. This is like basic one framework. Decouple who you are from what you do. And it's so intertwined. That's why the fight, flight, freeze mechanisms are on full tilt for people prior to walking on stage or prior to getting on the mound. Those true brain mechanisms that are responsible for survival are on point when there's nothing of real threat, physical threat. The only thing on threat, whether you're on the mound or on the stage, is other people's opinions. But our ancient brain, as beautiful as it is, hasn't caught up with modern frameworks. So just kind of pulling out identity, what you do, pulling those two things out is this massive gift to space and creativity.
All right. What did you hear there?
That was relatable.
Nina?
Detached from the outcome.
Well, hold on. Go, Danielle.
No, just this idea that you are what you do, and it takes a really long time to uncouple that. I don't know. I feel like that's the process I'm in.
Steve?
Hold on one second. I mean, this is real estate. Who are you in real estate? Every single one of you. Who are you? Who are you?
I think it's getting to the personality based.
No.
aspect.
Who are you?
Listen
Who
to the
are
way.
you in real estate?
Have you ever talked with
what
like
we
a
do.
sales manager about how they look at the people they hire? They have labels for all of us. That's who we are. We're the
No.
middle ones who make the company money. We're the top performers who are the loss leaders.
Loss leaders, right? Are you the new agent?
We're the
Okay.
new base where 1 out of 10 of you might survive.
All of you in real estate, who are you?
Your production.
Your production. That's who you are. 25 million, 10 million, 15 deals. You are your production. Why do you think you have a results orientation, everyone? Why do you have a results orientation?
We were
We define
programmed.
ourselves.
Because we haven't separated our identities from what we do.
Right. Your identity is what?
Your production.
Your production. And that's why you have a results orientation.
Because we have a survival mindset.
And because your brain, not your mind, your brain is wired for survival, what's the thing that matters most to each and every one of you?
Work.
The next deal.
No, what other people think. What other people think. That's the thing that drives you.
I think of things that have changed so much, right? And so, like, one of
Someone's playing a different podcast. I love it.
And freedom.
But how do you talk to an athlete about not identifying with what you do when you're in an industry that's so cutthroat that if you are not winning, you don't get to do that thing very long?
Oh, most of my environments are exact, meaning like there's a short runway for mistakes because it's also public. And so it's not that you don't identify with what you do, but your identity is not just that. And so when you pull apart what you do from who you are, the work is to say, well, who am I independent of what I do? It's that part of you that's the same as when you're 30, that you were 3 or 13, like, who am I? And then the thing that I do ends up becoming the way I'm expressing my craft and expressing my philosophy and expressing my psychology. And I'm using my body or my canvas, whatever that might be, to do just that. And I'm telling you, it's the bet to lay because you create space and then you damp down all of the alarm bells in our brain. And let me just kind of do a little nerdy thing here for just a moment, that there is a difference between the brain and the mind. And yes. I'm going to butcher an analogy here just for the sake of simplicity, that the brain is like the hardware in a computer and the mind is like the software that runs the hardware. Now, it doesn't quite hold up when you really pull on the science of it, but it is interesting to think about, like, okay, you were born with some hardware, but who programmed your software? And for most people.
What's the answer to that question? Who trained your software?
Your parents.
Parents, your childhood.
Yeah, not you. Not you.
Your
and
past.
that's what can change right here, right now, today. And that's what we work on every week, is reprogramming the way we think. And if you're not working on it every single day, what's going to happen? You're going
Your
to
mind is going to revert back.
You're going to default back to your programming. And especially when
things aren't going well.
in a
When you're
high,
under pressure, when you're under
you're
pressure.
under pressure,
High stakes.
when you're
Under
under
stress.
pressure.
Right.
Well, we talk about emotional intelligence and tactical empathy. That all goes out the window when you're where?
High stakes situation.
When you're in
In the
front of a
game.
client. When you're in front of a client, unless you're doing what? Unless you're doing what?
Practicing.
Practicing when?
Every day.
Every day.
Every day, specifically and with feedback.
People, it's like, I don't know, for me, it was the knuckleheads on, when I was in grade school, they like, and then the commercials I was watching and what the stars might say or might not say from sport. Like, and then my, the religious people in my family, and then my parents were doing their best, but it's a junk. It was, before I really dove into it, it was a junkyard approach to identity and philosophy and whatever. And so there's a chance now as a informed adult.
It was a junkyard approach.
I love
Can
that.
anyone relate to that?
Yes.
Huh?
Yes.
What does
It's like
that
that.
mean
It's like that.
exactly?
It's
sounds
like
like
that
Chelsea.
scrappy dog out there just looking for bits of something in the junkyard so they can survive.
Yeah, just a little here, a little there, just all over the place. And it's all about survival. So one of the things that he gets to, and we'll continue listening to this next week, is this idea that you cannot outperform your self-image, your self-worth, your self-esteem. This is a big, big issue for each and every one of you. Why? Why?
Habit.
That's the software.
Because you don't believe in yourself. You do not believe in yourself. And when you don't believe in yourself, how are you supposed to perform at a high level? Someone please explain. How does that happen? There's a very specific answer.
No.
It doesn't.
It doesn't. That's how it happens. It doesn't. And so what does that mean in practical terms for each and every one of you?
You
need
really
to
have to
rewrite
look
it.
at yourself and your belief about yourself, and on a very core level.
That if you're not working on that, that is job one. If you're not working on your head, then everything else you're doing doesn't make a difference. Every dollar you spend on marketing is what?
Possibly wasted.
Probably wasted. Most likely wasted. Where should that dollar be spent first?
On your mind.
Getting your mind straight.
On you. On you. On you. You've got to get your head in the right place. That's what makes a difference. That's what makes a difference. Not running around chasing after magic pills. There are no hacks. There are no shortcuts. None. Stop looking for it. Stop looking for it. I had the classic. I had one of my coaching clients, good client, good producer. And yesterday she was lamenting You know, everyone's on Instagram bragging about their first quarter. This one did this, this one did that, this one did this. And I had a good first quarter, but however, it wasn't nearly as good as everyone else's first quarter. What am I doing wrong? What you're doing wrong is looking at what everyone else is doing. That's what you're doing wrong. And what you're not doing is what?
Looking at yourself.
Looking at yourself. How many of you do that to yourself all the time? The fact is, the reality is, we do not live in a finite space. Every single one of you on this call, you're not competing against each other. All of you can be as successful as you want to be. There's no limitation based on what anyone else is doing. However, most of you look at it that way, as if the pie is finite and whatever anyone else gets means less for me. What did they do? How many of you wonder, what are they doing? What are they doing? And what you do, though, is you compare, and comparison is the thief of joy. That's what comparison is. The reason why you get on a program with someone like Dana is not to compare yourself. The reason you do it is to learn. And to say to yourself, well, if they can do it, what does that mean? I can too. I can too. That's getting yourself into the right what?
Mindset.
Mindset. If they can do it, then that means I can do it. And now I'm going to take responsibility for what?
Myself.
Doing it.
Action.
Doing it. Not making excuses. Not coming up with reasons why it doesn't work for me. Not blaming someone else. You are in a performance business. All of you need to understand that. You're in a performance business. This is what you do. This is how you get paid. And if you're in a performance business, then you've got to train. And again, the things you can train are your mind, your body, and your craft. In this situation, the context of real estate, training your body gives you the energy to do the things that you need to do. Training your mind is critical because every day you're under the gun. Every day you're dealing in rejection and disappointment and failure. And if you don't have the right mindset, you're going to give into your survival thinking. You're going to give into what other people think. And then you have to train your craft. Time blocking, CRM, process management, emotional intelligence, tactical empathy. What I'm providing in this 12-week program is a framework. It's a framework. Or you can do what?
Chase.
Wing it.
Run around like an idiot every day.
Chicken without a head.
So wake up, everyone. It's not about putting your picture on your business card. It's not about how many pieces you mail. I went to the mailbox last night. I got a big mailer from someone. I'm just like, oh God. Here's the question that I ask of all of you. Do you really want to get a phone call off a mailer? Is that how you want to run your business? Is that what you really want to do? I mean, what is a seller thinking? Oh, I'm gonna list my, I got a piece of mail. I'm gonna list my home with this person. Really? Anyway, that's my pet peeve. I digress. We'll continue with the call next week. I want you to really, really think about what it means to be an elite performer. And do you think about yourself as an elite performer? And if you do, what does that mean in terms of how you need to train and condition yourself on a daily basis? Do you have a sturdy framework? Are you aligning your thoughts, your words, your actions, no matter the circumstance or condition, with your framework, your core values, your core principles? All right. Thanks for being here today.
That was
Bye-bye.
a good one, Steve.
Thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
Steve.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.